What's good? It's Woog. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. So Canelo Alvarez versus Caleb Plant is upon us. I recently did a preview video. You can check that out. It's more comprehensive. I just wanted to give some final thoughts and some things to consider for anybody who's really not giving Caleb Plant a chance in this one. Now, in full disclosure, I actually picked Canelo to win this fight. And as I mentioned in the video, I went from going via decision to via late stoppage. And it was basically because I was just concerned and am concerned about, the structural integrity of, Caleb Plant's face and body as the fight goes on. Canelo has proven himself to be one of the best sharpshooting power punchers in boxing, and his ability to kind of deconstruct and make adjustments over time where he can start applying more pressure and more pain as the rounds continue. I thought that Caleb Plant would have some early success, some, close competitive rounds, but a couple things that I just can't discount is that I think that a lot of the close rounds will be awarded to Canelo Alvarez. That's just kind of how boxing works when it comes to fights with such a major A-side fighter. But some things that I really want to give some thought to are rewatch Canelo's fight against Sergey Kovalev. And granted, it was at 175. It's his one fight, Canelo's one fight at light heavyweight. But look at the difficulty that he had with somebody who was just being converted into a back foot, work behind the jab type of boxer under Buddy McGirt. Sergey Kovalev was, the come forward crusher through the prime of his career. But even with his newly developed skill set or developing skill set, he was able to have a lot of success round over round against Canelo to where like 8 rounds into it, we weren't sure who was winning the fight. Some had Kovalev up, some had Canelo up, some had it at about a draw. So the fact that Kovalev had that much success over Canelo through, let's say, 2/3 of the fight, he obviously started to wilt in the 8th, 9th, 10th until he was stopped. But Kovalev, was well past his prime, right? And then you look at Canelo's other 168-pound fights. Like, remember when it was just Rocky Fielding and then nobody really made too much of that one because of how outmatched Rocky Fielding appeared to be? He was about as outmatched as Avni Yildirim was against Canelo. But when you look at his fight against Callum Smith was an undefeated WBA champion at the time. He hadn't fought like a bunch of tremendous fighters, but he stopped the old George Groves. He was awarded a very controversial disputed decision win against John Ryder. But in a lot of Callum Smith's fights, especially in that World Boxing Super Series, he was winning a lot of his fights by stoppage. And, he was a big 168. He's 175 now, but he's 6'3". Canelo's only, 5'8", 5'9". But you saw Canelo able to walk down the significantly slower and more plodding Callum Smith. We could agree that that's not Caleb Plant, right? Well, okay, I was impressed with that win over Callum Smith. I was extremely impressed. I thought that was a very dangerous comeback fight for Canelo when he was just getting over the legal issues with Golden Boy Promotions. And, picking Callum Smith as your first opponent back, with this temporary arrangement with Eddie Hearn and Matchroom, I was like, damn, he's going right for the killers in this division. Now, granted, David Benavidez doesn't have a belt, and a lot of people think that he's the boogeyman, rightfully so, of the division. Well, it's not Canelo's fault that David Benavidez lost his WBC title twice. Neither had anything to do with losing a fight. Benavidez is still undefeated, but outside of the ring and, during the weigh-in, he lost his WBC belt twice. If he had the WBC belt, I have no reason to doubt that he would have been in line for one of Canelo's immediately next opponents. Like, Canelo made his statement clear. He wants to unify all 4 titles at 168. So it's David Benavidez's fault that he's not in the Canelo sweepstakes. Canelo's going for the belts. So when you look at then his fight with Billy Joe Saunders, if you've been watching Billy Joe Saunders throughout his career, you know that he's not really a true 168. He's a 160 guy who's fighting at 168 and happens to have a belt there. But, some champions win their title by beating, Oscar De La Hoya in his prime, if you're Sugar Shane Mosley. And other champions win their belt in a vacant title bout against somebody who nobody's heard of. And I think that Billy Joe Saunders, at least at 168, falls into that latter category where it's like, who did you really beat to solidify and stake your claim at 168? I still don't think Billy Joe Saunders is a full 168. He's a finesse fighter, as he was at 160. But, I thought he fought Canelo for a few of those rounds very competitively. I thought he was more competitive than most people who I've seen feedback from thought those rounds were, round over round. So if you look at, again, Billy Joe Saunders, small 160, not a true 168, right? You look at, Callum Smith, who, with all the punching power and the length that he has, there were clearly deficiencies in his game when you're matched up against somebody as sharp and coordinated and compact power punching, combination throwing with that intelligent jab that Canelo has. You can see where you fall into problems. Like, when is the last time you've seen a 5'8" guy jab a 6'3" guy that successfully, where it looks like his arm has like an extension on it the way that it's getting to Callum Smith's face? Well, that's because he throws a lot of nuanced, sophisticated feints and so forth to open up the shell that was Callum Smith for much of that fight. So you look at Callum Smith, you look at Billy Joe Saunders, and you look at Sergey Kovalev. And neither of these guys, I don't believe, are as complete boxing-wise, just sweet science-wise. I mean, Billy Joe Saunders is a sweet science fighter, but again, he's not as big and strong as Caleb Plant, period. He's not as big and strong as Caleb Plant. And now, I've seen some people say that they thought that he hit as hard, if not harder, than Caleb Plant. I don't see the evidence to support that. I really don't. I mean, I saw Caleb Plant drop Jose Uzcategui multiple times in their fight. So Caleb Plant, even if he's not a devastating puncher, he bodily-wise is a strong 168 who moves well. So he doesn't have all the movement, and he's not a southpaw like Billy Joe, but he moves well. He's a sweet science boxer, defensively responsible, works behind the jab, has quicker hands than Callum Smith, quicker hands than Sergey Kovalev, and he's got more faith in his sweet science boxing ability, I believe, than Sergey Kovalev had. So if these other guys had, marginal success, in the case of Sergey Kovalev, I thought he had a lot of success against Canelo. Why are we so quick to discount Caleb Plant's chances if he's a true 6 foot, he's athletic, he seems to be brimming with confidence where, we could look at Caleb Plant's resume and clearly see that he hasn't fought nearly the caliber of fighter that Canelo's been fighting over the past 10 plus years, right? Like, Canelo's strength of schedule, fight over fight, is incomparable to the lack of quality of Caleb Plant's opponents. But sometimes you just have these situations where the guy has the skill set, because styles make fights, to give another fighter all kinds of problems, even if the resume doesn't add up, even if the, pound for pound rankings between the two guys doesn't add up, even if the evidence doesn't appear to support a case for Caleb Plant not only being competitive with Canelo, but potentially winning the fight. Even if the evidence doesn't seem to be there on the surface, I think that this can potentially be a lot more interesting than it appears to be for most. So what if Canelo gets off to the same somewhat slowish start that he did against Sergey Kovalev, where it seemed like it took him a few rounds to, you got to stay away from Kovalev's power. Not like Kovalev had as much faith in his punching power that he used to have back in the day, but you still got to be careful, right? You have to be careful for Caleb Plant's left hook, obviously. But what if Canelo has the same slow-ish start where he's having trouble closing the gap and the range between he and the taller, longer, we don't know who's stronger, but taller, longer, Caleb Plant, in hand speed-wise? Do we know 100% that Canelo's got the faster hands than Caleb Plant? I think he does, but I've got to see them both in the ring to actually prove that. I've got my assumptions. I think Canelo's quicker. But sometimes it's not until you see the guys in the ring where it's like, oh, that didn't really line up the way that I thought it would. So what if Caleb Plant is having some early success and is working behind the jab and seems to be as quick as Canelo. And Canelo seems like, he's shelling up and he's doing his, high guard, trying to walk Caleb Plant down. And it doesn't seem to be working through the first couple of rounds. Canelo's selective with his shots. I'm sure he's going to try to rip Caleb Plant to the body and let him know early, you're in here with a savage. I'm sure that Canelo is going to do that, or at least attempt to do that like he does with just about everybody. He gets their respect. But what if Caleb Plant also tags Canelo early and kind of gets his respect to where Canelo starts reacting to Caleb Plant's feints? This can be shaping up for an interesting one. So if it looks competitive in the first few, then we're going to be on heightened alert, heightened awareness going into the middle rounds to see if Canelo's plan of, walking Caleb Plant down, leading him into power shots to the body up top, mixing up the attack and just, and showing his upper body and head and trunk movement that Canelo's become famous for. It wasn't always that way. He was always good defensively. I think he's ascended to pretty great defensively. What if Caleb Plant's not buying it? Like, it shocked me when Canelo had that type of success against Daniel Jacobs, for instance, when Daniel Jacobs at first wasn't finding Canelo with the power punches, but then it got to a certain point where Daniel Jacobs couldn't even find Canelo with the jab. It's like, damn. So what if Caleb Plant has more success than that, where it's looking a little bit like Canelo versus Sergey Kovalev, only Caleb Plant appears to be more demonstrative. It seems to be more flamboyant and showcasing to the crowd, to the audience, to the judges, referee, like, I'm in control here. What if, and there are obviously a lot of what ifs here, but what if this isn't as easy for Canelo as we think it's going to be? I mean, I've heard from a lot of y'all that seem to think that Canelo is just going to have his way with Caleb Plant. I'm not sure it's the case. Now, the reason why I'm sticking with my Canelo prediction is because I think that even if Canelo's right hand versus Caleb Plant's left hook is a wash, and let's just say hypothetically that even their jab is a wash, I think that Canelo has shown more rounds 8 through 12 durability, obviously experience, but durability where you are maintaining more of your energy and you're not fading in the way that I've seen Caleb Plant fade. Even in his title win against Uzcategui, Caleb Plant seems to be less sharp. Everybody's less sharp, but seems to be significantly a notch down in the late rounds, let's say 9 through 12, than Canelo seems to be. Canelo fought spirited with Triple G both times late in the fights, part 1 and part 2. So I think that Canelo seems to have more 12-round endurance, and he's got more experience in these high-profile fights to where he can manage his energy over the course of 12 rounds. I'm not convinced that Caleb Plant has the same game planning ability that Canelo has. A lot of times when people are under the brightest of lights for the first time, they tend to be running on adrenaline through a lot of those early rounds to where they didn't really manage their energy efficiently to be able to make it sustainable through 12, and they end up fatiguing. I've seen it in the UFC and in boxing a ton, where they are tired, and I mean dog tired, by the middle rounds, like 6 or 7, even 5 sometimes. So I have more belief in Canelo's ability to navigate those waters than I do Caleb Plant, but also I think that, again, if we're going to call Caleb Plant's right hand and Caleb Plant's left hook and Canelo's right hand a wash, and let's say for the sake of argument that their jabs are also a wash, they neutralize each other, I have more faith in Canelo's follow-up to the combination. Basically, I have more faith in Canelo's left than I do in Caleb Plant's right. And I think that might be the major. There might be a few differences, but that could be a big one. I'm not calling Caleb Plant all out a one-handed fighter, but I've seen Canelo do the work with both hands. I've seen either hand take control of a fight, depending on the matchup, depending on the fight. So I have more faith in Canelo's ability to do that. Even if you look at the that face-off where they got into the scuffle, look at the shot that they opted for. Caleb went left, Canelo went right. But if you look at if things were to continue with fists and gloves, it looked like Canelo was going to be landing harder with his offhand, we'll call it, even though you could hardly call Canelo's left hand an offhand. He's clearly a two-handed fighter, but again, it looked like that left hand for Canelo was about to do more damage to Caleb than Caleb's right hand was about to do to Canelo. But again, I want to see the ring generalship in this fight. I can't wait, but I'd be really curious to see, one, if Caleb Plant keeps that same energy. He seems to be like a pretty real dude. I mean, we could agree. He's at least selling his confidence, and he's had a history of doing so. I've been paying attention to him for a minute now, and he seems to be cut from a pretty tough cloth. He doesn't seem to be a punk, you know what I mean? But I really want to see the ring generalship, and I want to see if Canelo is able to close the gap to where he's able to splash with those significant Canelo power punches against Caleb Plant before we get too late in the fight. Because Canelo, and I'm not saying that Canelo's going to do this, but Canelo can't afford to be looking for the big one. Even though he found that big one against Billy Joe Saunders, I mean, I think that, you could say the chances are he was going to end up hitting him with combinations later as the fight persisted and went on anyway. But his chances diminish if he's looking solely for the home run. Again, it's never really been Canelo's style, even though he's found the home run in several fights. It's all about the boxing. It's all about the setups. It's a lot about the deception as well. But can Caleb Plant keep Canelo from being all over him, from walking him down? Can he get Canelo's respect? If he could get Canelo's respect and Canelo has similar difficulty closing the range through the first, let's say, 6-7 rounds against Caleb Plant that I think he had against Sergey Kovalev, we could be in for a very interesting matchup here. But yeah, let me know your thoughts in this. I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that Canelo takes him out. Of course, you've got to lean Canelo unless there's some reason or evidence-wise to lean the other way. I'm favoring Canelo again. He's rightfully favored in this fight. I think that he's going to score a stoppage late in this fight. But keep your eye on those aspects. I'm really curious to see how that plays out. But yeah, leave your comments in the comments. Like the video. Subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.